And as we said just a few moments ago, South Africa was not originally part of the BRIC group. It joined in 2010, and then, and only after much lobbying, it got in. That's when the BRIC added the S to become the BRICS. But the man who first coined the acronym thinks that South Africa should not have been invited to the party at all.
I still, to this day, much to the irritation of the South African authorities, question the wisdom of that, because when it comes to the economics, South Africa's a tiny economy. I'm very fond of saying China creates another South Africa every 3 months. So South Africa doesn't deserve to be thought of in the same kind of sphere of importance. But that said, I admire them a lot for having the strength and conviction of persuading the others to include them in this club, because of course it gives some kind of African flavour too. And in the 4 countries there was no representation from Africa. But these days they're not even the biggest country in Africa. Nigeria is now bigger than Africa in terms of GDP. So. You know, I'm not sure the wisdom of South Africa having been included, to be honest.
You can imagine that's a little controversial, but that was just part of our fascinating talk with Jim O'Neill. Back in 2001, he was working for Goldman Sachs Asset Management. He wrote a paper that laid out the BRIC concept. It was meant to be an investment tool, a gimmick, so to speak, for investors, but it turned out to be so much more. And as we wrap up our week of coverage of the BRICS, here's the origin of the acronym in the words of its creator.
If globalization was to thrive, then it had to stop equating to Americanization, and we needed to have a more complex globalization that would incorporate countries of different beliefs, whether they be philosophical, political, or whatever. And that's what led to me thinking up of an idea of incorporating the most important emerging economies into this concept, and that was the launch of the whole BRIC thing. And a few weeks later, I wrote this paper, and that started the whole thing off. Never in a million years did I dream it would end up resulting in a political club and their own development bank.
Well,
and here we are, 13 years later.
Congratulations. I want to follow up. You mentioned the word important, important emerging markets. How did you define important? Was it by the size of the economy? Was it by the size of the country? Was it by potential?
Well, it was primarily based on the sheer size of the populations, and of course, with the exception of Indonesia, the 4 BRIC countries are the 4 largest populated emerging countries in the world, or certainly were at the time. That's now changed 13 years on with some other emerging places like Bangladesh and Pakistan. But the 4 BRIC countries were the most populated. And 3 of them, at least, excluding Brazil, China, India, and Russia, had all started to engage in globalization in the preceding years to that event happening. So I was sort of trying to embrace this new crowd joining the global markets and the global economy deliberately to give them more recognition and more acknowledgement. Brazil, in some ways, was the slightly odd one out, particularly because right at the time, and why many people thought I was nuts, people were worried about a major crisis in Brazil just before Lula became the president. People were worrying about a Brazilian default, and people thought I was crazy to add them on. But I was very focused on the inflation targeting regime that Brazil had adapted under the previous leadership. And that led me to think that Brazil would be probably a very different place than it had been in my previous 20-year career.
So my next question is, was there any country that you would have wished you put in that group that you did not? I mean, was there somebody that was very close on the edge that you say, this is a very tough call where you have to almost, it was a 50-50 at that time?
Not in the immediate time of 2001, but I remember by 2003, 2004, partly because of the complaints from different countries, I did start to explore in my mind whether maybe I should have included Mexico. But as it turned out, because Mexico was such a disappointment the last decade, I was very relieved that I didn't. And despite some, well, as I'm sure we'll get into, despite some disappointments the past couple of years, I think 13 years looking backwards, I chose the right 4 countries, and I don't think any other emerging economy, whether it be Mexico or others, have any real rational grounds for complaining.
5 to 10 years from now, Jim, where do you see the BRICS economy at? I mean, it's been a great ride for almost a decade and a half. The last couple of years hasn't been all that great, but to put that in perspective, it hasn't been all that great for a lot of countries. So it's not we're not discriminating against the BRICS. It's just around the world, it's been tough.
It looks as though the BRIC countries collectively, of course, will not grow as much this decade as they did the last. Importantly, I have assumed that they won't, especially because of the importance of China. China's today 1.5 times the size of the other 4 put together. So what happens in China is very important for the aggregate. And I think their rate of growth will be somewhat slower. But very importantly, for those people that follow these things closely, slowdown in China and to some degree in Russia is not surprising at all. And so I'm not that disappointed whatsoever. And if I link it to the big projections we made going all the way out to 2050, I have absolutely no reason to really fundamentally doubt the broad pattern that I expected all that time ago still today. So by 2027, for example, I expect China to be as big as the US in current US dollars. And I still think, even though it's another decade after that, by 2037, the BRIC countries collectively could be bigger than the G7.